That's right, everybody. Welcome back to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Demons. That's right, you heard me correctly. It's no longer the City of Angels, folks. And we are on the absolute world's largest network, which happens to be YouTube. I know that mouse might sound mundane, but it's so damn true. Now, today is a topic that really, in the last 7 years, I've been looking for the person to talk about this. I was someone who really has an educational background and someone who's really done an in-depth study of this great topic, which happens to be the lost city of Atlantis. And I found that person. That is the one and only Mr. Frank Joseph Hoff. Mr. Hoff, welcome to the show. Yeah, that's true. They are definitely around the world. People from Australia. I mean, I've even seen Northern Ireland, and you won't. It's amazing where people actually listen to this. Now, because this also is an international topic, I did tell you briefly earlier before we came on air about my Greek background, and even long before I even knew what country I was really sitting in, I was, known about Atlantis. Now, let me before I ask you how you got into it, let me just say the basics of what I seem to have been known growing up and what is assumed to be acceptable in most cultures about Atlantis. This is something that Plato first mentioned in about 360 BC, and he mentioned it to be close to Greece, primarily near Malta, maybe, I think he said Asia Minor and Malta combined or something like that, and approximately the area of the Strait of Gibraltar, going back to about 9,000 years before him. And before I get to all those details and discuss them over with you, how did you get into Atlantis? Absolutely. Yeah, I know him well. And gift to the world by oh, can you expand on that? Now, it seems to me like that's what a civilization that they were looking up to. That's, had all our problems, and that's what they aim to fix, aim to be. Mu as in MU, right?
To how you break it down. But and that's where I need to maybe start to spell out where we found the location. I can get into that more in detail about the three different ones, and that involves Lemuria, Atlantis, and Atlantis proper, and so on. And that's why I want to break it down very carefully so people don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But I wanted to get back, and maybe it's your question is you're asking or mentioning earlier about it being located in like around the Greek islands or Santorini, as a lot of people think, and some of those kind of areas. I mean, you probably want it to be in Greece, right?
Yeah, because that's both where I'm from, and if you think about it, at the time they really had no idea about the Western world, meaning the United States, the New World, or anything that the Vikings or even Columbus had discovered. And I know there's debates even on that.
Well, we can get into that too, and now that's why I have to go through this more or less chronologically. Um, as far as Greece goes, I mean, I might myself want Atlantis to be in the United States, okay, and another person might want it to be in Canada, another person might want it to be in Russia and other places, or Spain, and so on. It's not what we really want. It's more or less what is and why it is, okay, especially at the time of the Pleistocene Ice Age, because the Pleistocene Ice Age was ending, or it was going on at the time of Atlantis, and so it has to be in a spot where basically over 20 million people could survive. And in places like Antarctica, where we've taken core samples in situ that end up being over 2 million years old. So that ice has been there, and if you know Antarctica today, it's hard to support, let's say, 1,000 people down there, let alone over 20-something million.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Unless, of course, the ice melted and the temperature wasn't swinging violently till it was at like 150 below zero Fahrenheit during their winter, which is exactly why they shut down their science camps there and leave. But you're absolutely right. I only think the way it's going to happen is when if we continue down this path, which I believe is just an Earth cycle, meaning that the Arctic and the Antarctic caps are melting, what's going to reveal there will be that giant landmass.
Well, the only thing with that is that at the time of the Pleistocene Ice Age, the world was probably a lot colder even than it is now by a few degrees centigrade. So they've taken the ice core samples there. This has been done several times in Antarctica by scientists, and they tend to come out, as far as in the dating, of over 2 million years old. That ice has been there. So it's not something like new or maybe melted or something like that. That's been there for a long period of time. So I would say like this: anything that is above 30 degrees north latitude or below 30 degrees south latitude is out of the picture as far as Atlantis goes in the middle of the Pleistocene Ice Age. So a lot of these spots where people think it might be, those are out of the picture. And I got to tell you, I'm in the area of Seattle here, and we're at latitude 47 degrees, and we're out of the picture. We're not Atlantis up here. We at that time here in let's say North America had a ice sheet on our continent that was something like 1.5 miles to 2 miles high. There's a lot of ice on our continent at that time. And so again, this is the middle of the Pleistocene Ice Age. So the location of Atlantis has to be in a place that could support a population of over 20 million people and have the temperate climate that they could live off of, as well as the appropriate amount of precipitation or rainfall, and the soil for growing crops. In this case, Atlantis was able to grow as many as 3 crops in 1 year, 1 season, like more or less. And so these are the kind of things that have to be done, be correct, And Professor Santos, he didn't try to force fit this kind of thing like you do with maybe a 1,000 or 2,000 piece puzzle. He had to make sure the pieces of the puzzle went in properly and evenly and nicely, and so they fit, so you get a total picture of what Atlantis was all about and where it was located. So he had to do this the right way, and it's not just a 1,000 or 2,000 piece puzzle, by the way. It was like a 1 billion piece puzzle that got scattered all around the world. So he had to spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and dig real deep in order to piece the pieces back of the puzzle so he could get a clear picture of what was going on. And again, as where it was located, and what about the civilization itself, and so on.
Now, like you mentioned earlier, what I suggested too is that they were looking to essentially as the model civilization, what we seem to aim to be. And this includes things like they had a very intelligent civilization. They were advanced technologically. Their buildings were very advanced, very beautiful. The architecture, down to the wealth even, right?
Well, they had a lot of these kind of things. One of the things they ended up inventing was metallurgy. A lot of inventions came out of Atlantis, and so they were able to. They were big on navigation, metallurgy, where the basically religions were first invented. Your sciences, your mathematics, astronomy, all these different things, because what they did is that the most important probably invention, of all time was probably agriculture. That was a big invention because you didn't have to be a hunter-gatherer all day long. You could focus on these other science, religions, philosophies, metallurgy, and all these types of engineering type of feats. If you're able to take care of your agriculture, and also animal domestication or animal husbandry as well.
So, it's ironic you mentioned that, because I always thought that's just one of the steps to us getting to a civilization and leaving the hunter-gatherer. However, it was not too long ago that I'd watched something, and it talked about the great hoax that ruined mankind, and they made the argument that the moment we started settling on one land, in one area to harvest, right, instead of moving from place to place to deal with the weather and different things like that, the moment we started building our entire civilization based off of a certain location, well, then if a famines happen to come there, or a drastic storm killing all the crops, or an illness, or anything like that, it wasn't one person that was going to have to deal with the consequences. It was the entire civilization. Now I know this can be argued both ways. Clearly, that's what we do now. I mean, we're still following what they were doing thousands of years ago in picking a spot and using it for agriculture.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that he had to trace back. That is Professor Mauricio Nunes dos Santos, Professor Santos, is because he had to find a place on this Earth, on this planet, where a population of over 20 million people could survive in the middle of the Pleistocene Ice Age. And he had to search for a place that potentially could do that. And what a lot of people think, if it's Atlantis, it's got to be in the Atlantic Ocean.
I know, right? Yeah. That's where the name comes from even, right?
Yeah, except for a couple of things. It's not the Atlantic Ocean as it's called today. It's the Atlantis Ocean of Atlantis, as it was called 11,600 years ago, and that's just the ending date, and going back, 15, 20, 30,000 years, and so on. And what happened is that he found out is that it was located really on the opposite side of the world, which is called Antipodal, and he also found out that the oceans, the names got changed over time. And for instance, it was really the oceans of the Atlanteans, and now it's kind of renamed like the Pacific Ocean, and also it's and that has to do with an explorer originally that was named Vasco Balboa, which discovered it, but in a sense he was not the person that named it. That was Ferdinand Magellan, who saw it down through the Straits of Magellan, down through the area of Argentina and Chile, the way down in that area. And so what he named it was a name from the infinitive verb, either in Portuguese or Spanish, called Pacificar. And that means to be passive or quiet or calm, because when he saw the ocean at the time, he saw it as a very peaceful and passive and calm ocean, so he named it that. And so depending on how you use it in a sentence or so, it's either named Pacifico or Pacifica. And so we dropped the O or the A, and the name stuck, called Pacific Ocean, for us English-speaking people around the world, and maybe so on. And so that ended up sticking. Now the other one, it used to be called over in the Indian Ocean, was called the Erythraean Sea. It was actually the Erythraean Sea, and they changed that to the Indian Ocean. But it was also at the time the oceans of the Atlanteans, because all the oceans together, the Atlantic, Pacific, and the Indian, were all coterminous, and they basically still are today. It hasn't really changed. So what happened is that some of these oceans, the names get changed, and it kind of really messed things up. It might have been easier or better had the Atlantic Ocean been changed over to the name of the English Ocean. It might have been less confusion, and then maybe it might have been easier if let's say the Indian Ocean was called the Atlantic Ocean, or maybe the Pacific one was. So the thing is they got changed on these names. I mean, a lot of names, Dr. J, get changed over, let's say, 500 or 1,000 years. But you can imagine how much change there might be over 11,600.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Drastically. And, going even for what we think is accepted science, and even what I was telling you earlier about all these new megastructures being found that even predate 9,000 years ago, or 9,000 BC, which would be like you said, either 11,600 years or 11,400, regardless. Like I said, Göbekli Tepe, I think, is somewhere around 30,000 years, is what they're suggesting now. And I know the more we dig, the more we're going to find, especially in those regions like Greece, or even there was a show on History a few years ago. It was like the Lost Cities or something. And what they found is, in basically every major ancient city, when they were digging, they found like they would build cities on top of cities and on top of cities. The lower they went, the deeper underground they went, there would be massive, structures and like roads, etc. And it just seems that whatever catastrophe happened, whether it be earthquakes or anything that would put these cities to have soil and start, degrading away, they just built over them.
Yeah, they did that actually quite a bit down in Peru and also down in Ecuador, those couple of places. I wanted to kind of lead us into where Atlantis is, as I broke some of this down, but I want to get to the point that where Atlantis is really located for your audience.
Yeah, please, because this was something that I was really wanting to know even before, and I would love for you to talk about it because, as you know, we know that that's where the Greeks wanted it for a good reason. But I was in Hawaii not too long ago, visit some other friends who the listeners would know, the Cousins brothers, who have one of the world's largest UFO YouTube channels, and we were just talking about if you look on a map and you see how much ocean and emptiness there is in the Pacific, and you see things like Hawaii in the middle of literally nowhere. It just seems plausible that a giant area or continent like Mu was possibly there.
Yeah, but it's not exactly where some people think it is. That's why I want to kind of spell this out a little bit more in detail. First of all, I want to mention a couple of things. We have a website out too. It's simply called www.atlan.org. It's the first 5 letters of Atlantis. It's a .org website. We have quite a few different types of postings up there, and so you can see it under Atlantis information and so on, articles. And also the book I want to mention, it's available through Amazon, which is Atlantis, the Lost Continent Finally Found, and with the subtitle, The Definitive Localization of Plato's Lost Civilization. The word Atlantis is actually broken down, or Professor Samples had to decipher that word. It's a highly encoded language word in like 3 different languages. And I can start to tell you a little bit more about that, too, because what we found, also, or Professor Santos found, because he was a linguist. I told you earlier he spoke 14 languages, and it takes a person that knows linguistics extremely well to understand all the types of breakdowns of these words and the etymology and so on. And he found out, first of all, that the language of the Atlanteans actually spoke was Dravida. Dravida is the language. You probably only ever heard this from me, or
actually, you're 100% correct. I've never heard that literally until you just mentioned it.
Yeah, the language is Dravidian. It's Dravidian, and the closest languages right now, where more than 1 million people speak, believe it or not, still on this planet, is a language called Tamil. It's also has other ways of saying it. In other words, Tamil.
Tamil?
Yeah. And there's another way of saying it. It's called Tamir. And another way to say it is Tamil. So you can say it 4 different ways. I had to find out all 4 ways.
It's actually the third one is what I've heard, barely. I mean, I don't even know where I read that or heard that, and nor did I ever even hear that had that anything to do with Atlantis. I just assumed that it was, Neolithic Greece or something like that. Greek.
No. Well, actually, the word Atlantis is actually in the Greek language, but that's why I brought out the idea. I mean, not the idea, but the case where what the Atlanteans spoke was Dravida, because it's also encoded with Greek, Dravida, and the other one is Sanskrit, those 3. And so that's why I wanted to bring this out, because he decoded that, and he also could speak Dravida, Professor Santos, is he was actually helped him to decode the whole notion of Atlantis, or the problem of Atlantis, the riddle of Atlantis, because it's quite an enigma, and there's a lot of traps for people trying to research this that fall into, including Professor Santos himself. But he has enough skill and knowledge to be able to pull out of some of these traps and misinformation and disinformation to be able to figure out really where it was at. And part of that was decoding the word Atlantis, and it comes from the word Atlas is derived from the Greek radix, which is tala, T-L-A, meaning to bear. It's also preceded by the Greek negative A, meaning not. Hence the word Atlas from Atala, A-T-A-T-L-A, literally means one who is unable to bear the weight of the skies. The main thing is that also the Greek name is in fact derived from a similar one called in Sanskrit, one of Hindu called Atala. Atala is the Hindu hell, the site of the sunken paradise. As in Greek, the name Atala also is composed of the Sanskrit A, meaning not Tala, or the pillar, more exactly, the pillar of heaven. So what it is it also goes down to the word Tala, which means earthland. And the name Atala is interpreted to mean no land, or sunken land. So what it really comes down to is that the Dravida word is Ata Allah, which is the first root and corresponds to Ata, or footstoles, footsteps, or antipodus. Antipodus is antipodal, meaning opposite side of the world, and sunken land, and lagoon or marshland, islands, which lays on the opposite side of the world. And what the whole thing means is that it means that Atlantis is on the opposite side of the world, and is located in a sunken island, mountain, marshland, from the, let's say, the area of Europe on the opposite side. And so what he found out by decoding all that is that it's located between the South China Sea, and the Java Sea, and where the Indian Ocean meets the Pacific Ocean. And that area is Southeast Asia, and the main part of that is Indonesia and the surrounding area of Southeast Asia. And that's where Atlantis is located.
Very interesting. That would fall into the Pacific, not closer to the United States, but closer to there. So I'm west of Hawaii, east of Asia, in essence, what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and there's a couple other things with that. If you heard the old saying where east meets west?
Yes, yes.
Well, that's where the east meets west, is between the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean, and that's where it comes together right there, and it's right on Atlantis and the Java Sea and so on, and the South China Sea. And so, but you're able to actually navigate from one to the other, although that was kind of a feared area at one time. And that goes back to your earlier question or statement that you mentioned about Christopher Columbus. And what happened with Christopher Columbus, and you remember this in school, is that he was in search of the East Indies.
Yes.
That's, you remember, not the West Indies, which, by the way, is like in the Caribbean. And so he was actually really kind of probably a spy for the kings and queens of Europe. But the thing he had was some really good maps, which is probably actually more valuable and sometimes in treasure. But he was also looking for the Golden Peninsula for the kings and queens of Europe, which he kind of just finding out was located in the East Indies. The only problem is he ended up running into the Americas because he didn't take the Critias and Timaeus dialogues of Plato seriously. And now there's going to be this outer landmass, which is like the Americas, both North and South America as well as Central America. And so they ended up landing there, and if you recall, they discovered America more or less, and really they also discovered the Native Americans, and they started calling them Indians because he thought he was originally in the East Indies.
Yeah, he had no idea that this was a whole different continent, or now we call it two, but really I always just refer to it as the Americas as one.
The Western Hemisphere.
Yes.
So we found out that about 2 months after they had landed here on the Americas, is that he found out the Indians, the way he named the Indians, was misappropriated. That they weren't the Indians that he was thinking like over in like towards India or Indonesia. By the way, the word Indonesia stands for islands of India, or islands like close to India. That's what Indonesia stands for. And so the name stuck for Indians, and so we misappropriated that name. It never dislodged. And so that's just like the word Pacific for Pacific Ocean stuck when it should have been the Atlantic Ocean or something else. So these are things that cause a lot of misinformation, and even today we're trying to still straighten out the Native American name, call the Native American real Americans here appropriately, and instead of calling them Indians, which is really reserved for people over, let's say, over in India or maybe Indonesia, but it's really India. So, what happened is that because this all got misconstrued, we started thinking that Atlantis is in other places and so on, but it's really ended up being over in this area of Indonesia. And by the way, what happened is that we had a couple of different catastrophic events that happened in Indonesia, and or I should say almost like Atlantis, Indonesia. One is at 75,000 years BP, approximately, is that's when the Toba volcano went off, the Toba. And another name for that is Sumeru, and it comes from Meru, Meru is like the holy mountain of paradise, along with another volcano that went off as they regrouped, and I want to lay out about the three Atlantises right now, is that as they regrouped, at the time they ended up rebuilding for a period of over 60,000 years. I mean, imagine how far we've come in, let's say, 1,000 years.
Yes.
And
even shorter than that. You could even say the last 120 or 140 years.
Yeah, and so, with all the jet aircraft and airplanes and rockets and everything else here now. But they developed over 60,000 years to the advanced civilization, Atlantis proper. But there was a destruction of Atlantis proper by the Krakatoa volcano. By the way, you can say the word Krakatoa several different ways. Okay, first of all, Krakatoa, that's the way you and I would say it, right? The other way is Krakatau. That's the way people like in Indonesia would say it. And then there's another word is Krakata. Krakata is in Sanskrit. That's the Sanskrit way. And Krakaka is the way you say it in Dravida. And what it means is, the word means actually to saw in like half, to saw through.
Huh.
And
interesting.
The Krakatoa volcano, we found out, ended up separating the islands, which is now called Sumatra, with the lower island, which is called Java. And so it used to be called Java, the whole island, both Sumatra and Java. And the Sumatra part was called Upper Java, and the other one, Java today, is called Lower Java. That's what it used to be called, but now it's just called Java. And so the word Krakatoa means to saw in half, and basically saw in half by the Krakatoa volcano, which went off at about 11,600 years ago, and ended up ending Atlantis, and opened up the Sunda Strait. and or Selat Sunda, as you would say in Indonesia. The language of Indonesia now is Bahasa Indonesia, which, by the way, I started studying, I should say, with Professor Santos quite a while back here, but I ended up marrying an Atlantean or Indonesian girl here as my wife, and she speaks Bahasa Indonesia. She also speaks Betawi, which is usually spoken around Jakarta.
How many different languages are there in Indonesia?
There's a whole lot, maybe like about 30.
Wow.
And then
okay. So more than India or something like that.
Well, that's a good question because it brings up the other one. She speaks another language called Sunda. Indonesia is sometimes referred to, or Atlantis, Indonesia, as Sundaland, but she speaks Sunda because she's from West Java versus Central Java or East Java, and so on. But there's a lot of different dialects and also a lot of different accents to follow that. Same with India's got just a lot of different languages and a lot of different dialects and a lot of different accents, and also they have all sorts of types of culture there because this is probably new to you too, but the culture for the world was invented in Atlantis, Indonesia, and it spread out from there to the rest of the world. It's not the other way around. And so a while back in 2013, I think it was about October, my wife and I were invited to speak before the World Cultural Forum by the Minister of Education and Culture and President at that time, Susilo Bambam Yudhoyono, President Yudhoyono, and so I gave a presentation there to the symposium, but oddly enough, almost by mistake, we ended up sitting on the red carpet with President Yudhoyono. So that was quite an event. It's in front of about 800 people. And my presentation was probably in front of about 200. And even the Brazilian ambassador to Indonesia showed up at my conference and really gave a glowing endorsement to Professor Santos' work. And he ended up purchasing the book, of all places, over in Singapore.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this. You mentioned the language earlier. Okay, obviously, if I heard someone speaking that language and I could know then if it's related to Greek or not, although that's very limiting, by the way. If I speak English, Spanish, and Greek, they're all derived essentially from Greek. Now, if it's something like, say, Aramaic or even anything that's on the Asian side, I would have no idea. But I'd be very, very curious if someone spoke it or even a sentence, and just like you said earlier, linguists to analyze that, just to see where the origins of that language came from, essentially.
Yeah, this is kind of a really good question, and I mean, it was the pristine language that was spoken in all of Southeast Asia at the time by the Dravidas, mm-hmm. And that was one part of the civilization, and also there was the Aryo Semites was another part of that civilization as well. But I have some associates that live in Singapore, and they speak the Tamil language, or close to being like Dravida. I've actually had them on some other radio shows speaking the language. And I don't know if you might be interested someday, but actually hearing the language of the Atlanteans, that might make for another show.
Oh, absolutely, I would. Absolutely. Yeah, we can count on that for sure. I'd love to set that up.
Yeah, and by the way, I want to go back to another point I want to get to for your listeners. There was actually 3 Atlantises, and the first one was Lemuria Atlantis, which was basically in the same area of Southeast Asia, Indonesia. But again, the Toba volcano took a large part out, and they had to rebuild. But what they did is they went into the area of India. Some areas got chased out of a little bit because some people, didn't like them coming in. So they ended up going to the Indus Delta Valley area of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, and also a lot of people on the south east side of India in a place called Chennai speak Tamil. But I also understand over in the Indus Delta Valley area they may be speaking it too, and they also speak in other parts of the world as the Tamil language as well. So in a sense, when it went into India, that was like the second Atlantis. And in a way, you can think of that, and it is the fatherland of civilization, where the area of Southeast Asia or Indonesia is the motherland of civilization. So you have usually the mother and the father first, and then when they rebuilt over a period of 60,000 years, they moved back to where Indonesia is, let's say, today. And that become the wondrous sun, or let's say the third Atlantis. Or you can think of maybe the other way around. Maybe it's the motherland first, and maybe the son or something second, and the father third, or something like that. But I don't like that order. I like the mother and father first and second, and then the wondrous son, the third Atlantis, going back to Atlantis proper, the advanced civilization being more or less the third one. But it just depends how you look at everything.
Here's a question for you. This is from Russell Grant. And by the way, I do want to acknowledge the 2 super chatters so far. Definitely, Justin T., thank you for your super chat and for being an amazing moderator. And also Paper Crane Wishes for the most recent. Now, this question, before I say it, please, everybody, if you can, try to put your questions in caps. Sometimes some people say they can't see them, but believe me, I can definitely see them. And it just makes it so much easier as I'm making sure the stream's running okay, absolutely paying attention to my guest, and trying to make sure I get your questions. So, here it is. This is from Russell Grant, Mr. Let me get it right. Okay, Dr. Hoff. This is, what is Dr. Hoff's opinion on the Richat, R-I-C-H-A-T structure of northern I always can't pronounce this. I know it's Mauritius, the on east side of Africa or near South Africa, the country, not the area. It's an island, a small island, Mauritius. So he's asking, what is your opinion on that Richat structure of northern Mauritania in Africa? I hope I said that properly.
Can you spell that?
Yes, it's rich. The Richat structure is R-I-C-H-A-T.
Okay. Don't really too much about it, but if he's associated with Atlantis at all, the main thing is with those particular places is at best they're either outposts or colonies of Atlantis. Just like some people think like Atlantis has got to be in Bimini or it's got to be in Santorini or someplace like that.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning Santorini, by the way, because when we were going to talk about Krakatoa, that was one of the first things that came to mind. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, it's not there. The area of Santorini, first of all, is not big enough a place and anything, or ever had an explosive volcano like a caldera, like Toba or Krakatoa. Those are huge and very explosive volcanoes, not like the one that we have up in here in Washington State, like Mount St. Helens, which, by the way, blew a lot of fly ash all over the place, mainly over toward central and eastern Washington. Thank God they didn't bring it. They didn't come over this way because I got a little bit of allergy and asthma problems, so I didn't want it over here. But enough came out of the Krakatoa volcano as well, which also is another problem for the world too, and how things developed. But no, these places that are located above 30 degrees north latitude and 30 degrees south latitude usually cannot be the case because of the middle of the Pleistocene Ice Age to support a population. I should tell you, though, in Africa is that there was kind of a migration going back and forth with people where the civilization really began, which is in Atlantis, Indonesia, depending on the polar desert conditions in northern Africa, which, by the way, you mentioned about where this place Atlantis is. It's supposed to be the size of Libya, which was actually the time basically all of northern Africa, it's changed today,
Yes. Yeah,
and
because this
Asia
is
Minor combined.
before, since Libya is not that far from Egypt, they're both on northern Africa, the continent. I'm assuming that's probably because maybe of the empire in Egypt.
Well, I mean, the whole thing changed around as far as the geography, the political lines.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, for instance, in India and Pakistan, that the Indus Delta Valley area there, Indus Delta River Valley area, is probably more in Pakistan now, but at the time it was in India because of the political borderlines get changed over time. And the same thing with Libya used to cover most of northern Africa, and so this whole area of, let's say, in Indonesia, and is a size of Asia Minor and the northern part of Africa combined, which is the size of the entire continental United States, by the way, this area of the continent Atlantis in Indonesia, the entire continental United States with Alaska, how big that is, and Hawaii combined.
Yes.
Combined, all of it.
It's ironic you
big
mentioned
area.
that because I actually have a picture of where Mu possibly would be, and when I'm looking at it compared to America or Atlantis or even something as small as Australia when compared to Mu, it is massive, massive.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Mu, you have people like James, the Colonel, by the way, James Churchwell. He mentioned about it being in the Central Pacific Ocean or some of these places for Mu and so on, the lost continent of Mu. But it never was. Some of these things just sound good, but he thinks there's like a land bridge and all these kind of things. Professor Stansels found out that never was the case, that the Mu was really where Atlantis, Indonesia is today. If you see a cover of our book on our website or a copy of our book on Amazon.com, it shows the picture of the continent that is of Atlantis now. And I tell you, what happened with the Krakatoa volcano is it wasn't that Atlantis sunk. It was that sea levels rose in a shallow area of the ocean and the world, and they rose 130 to 150 meters. And so
let me say one thing. First of all, I think you just actually answered one of the questions in queue for you. And second of all, I've always heard a theory. The reason why there are 3,200 islands in Greece is not that they are all, just leftovers from Santorini or things like that, but it may in fact be the higher tips of, say, mountains or areas, because it did sink, just like you said, 100 to 150 meters, which would be enough to look like a bunch of islands when in fact they're peaks of mountains.
Well, that's the vestiges of the tops of it. And guess what? In Indonesia, just Indonesia alone, there's over 17,500 islands.
Wow, yeah.
17,500. And so when you see the picture on our book, which Professor Stansels drew out from all sorts of geographical data, and so they were able to piece it together, the parts that are in yellow, which is about 2/3 of it, is underneath the ocean today. And the parts that are in brown, you can see there, are above the vestiges as you speak of. And so if you drop the sea level 150 meters, let's say, then the whole continent appears, again, the size of the entire continental United States, with Alaska and Hawaii combined. And there's no doubt about it, and I'll tell you why. Because we actually got a hold of, and I have it, is a NOAA Space Spy satellite photo, an infrared photo of this area we obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, the FOIA.
Yeah.
And it fits like a glove. And actually, it's even more exact than on Professor Stansels' data that he put on his book here. And so they fit together. I mean, it's not like, okay, we want to make it this way, or we just drew something out of the air. No, this is exact science on this, and it's very provable. And so it's there. There's no question it's there. It's below the sea, and the infrared denotes that.
Now, let me get to there's two questions in the queue, and I'll just read the one which you just did address, because I want to go in order. So, let's go back to where it was. I know it was Carol White's question, and then I'll get to Russell Grant's other question. Um, it's right here. Almost. Okay. Carol White's question. Why does the guest think Atlantis sunk? You addressed that. That maybe it didn't sink. That just, in fact, the water levels rose.
Yeah,
Okay.
I want to elaborate on that just a second, Dr. J. It wasn't that Atlantis sunk, it was the oceans rose, okay? And what they did is they rose because of the Krakatoa volcano causing the great deluge or the great floods that you hear in some of these ancient,
Text.
gospel texts, other religious type texts around the world. By the way, Professor Santos and I want to kind of preface this, aren't trying to change anybody's beliefs, religion, or anything else like that. We're just letting you know that there was a great deluge, and so that caused one of these tsunami effects, as you saw come into, let's say, Indonesia a while back, and up in the Aceh area, Banda Aceh, and also in Sendai, Japan, that all that water came in. Well, instead of coming in just maybe with a few meters, let's say 20 meters high, this came in at somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 meters high because of the Krakatoa volcano. And so what happened is it came in, and if you were out in a vessel, it would look like the continent sunk. And it's an optical illusion. And so what happened is later on, just like in Banda Aceh or other areas of Indonesia, the water receded. And same with Sendai, as you see that, all the destruction there, but it also receded. And so then what happened later on, because of the Krakatoa volcano, a lot of the fly ash went up in the air, in the stratosphere and atmosphere, and it took a while to come down, just like even Mount St. Helens. It went to other parts of the world, even from here. But this is a much more explosive volcano. It's a super volcano, both in Toba and especially this Krakatoa one. And I don't mean the one in 1883. I mean the one 11,600 years ago it went off. And so the fly ash ended up coming down all around the world on the glaciers and the ice. Like I mentioned earlier, that we had a mile high to 2 miles high sheet of ice here on the continent, on North America and other parts, let's say in Europe and so on. And so what we found out is that the soot or fly ash that came down ended up coming on the glaciers, and it melted the glaciers and around the world and the ice that was on the continents. And so what happened is that all that ice ended up having to go someplace and ended up going back into the sea. Now what happened is that it took a lot of weight off the continent, but also ended up causing a universal flood, not just in that area, but other areas around the world where we lost some coastline. And the universal flood took a while for it to balance out, like maybe 1,000 or something years, because you have all this weight coming off the continent, or continents, and you also have a lot of weight going onto the seafloor or oceans around the world. So you have all this seismic activity going on and causing a lot of earthquakes and so on. It had to straighten out over a long period of time. And so the fly ash, we found out, and this is not just from us, but if you go to a thing we have on our website called book links that link over to there's little numbers in our book. They go from basically 01 to 187, I believe is the number. And they usually have 2 or 3 or 4 book links per each one. It points to a lot of the evidence. So you can see, if you hear what I'm saying, you don't believe it, you can go to check a lot of this out yourself. And I believe it's number 12 book link 012 that goes to the NOAA or NASA website, NASA, and they show the same thing about the albedo effect, and that has to do with the absorption versus the reflection of the sunlight on the continents. As you know, if it's white, it'll reflect back, but if it's black or brown or sooty, it will absorb. And that we found out and not only us, but NASA found out that, and it melts the ice, and it has to go back into some place like the ocean or other places. And so that had all changed over a period of time, and so that ended up being caused the universal flood that you read about also in some of these ancient texts and gospels and religious books and whatever else. You follow me?
Yeah, absolutely. Before, I know you did need a mid-show break. There are 3 questions that have lined up, and I want to know if you're able to get these 3 asked, because one of them actually was something that I had meant to ask, and I should have even asked your opinion about that whole topic before the show. But nonetheless, they're still good questions. So let me go back to the first one, which was, let me go back. Okay. Oh, no, this is the second one. Here's the first one. This is again from Russell Grant. What were the climate conditions 11,500 years ago? If you could, if there's a way to know them, I'm guessing from other areas that have been dug down deep enough to maybe see the sediment and things like that of the region. And too,
Okay.
let me add that
Sure.
in the region.
Yeah, excellent question. I think it's Grant. Grant, here's the deal with that. It was in the middle of Pleistocene Ice Age. So you had as I mentioned earlier, it supported a population of over 20,000 people. The area of Indonesia, or Atlantis, Indonesia, has the precipitation there every year, even in the middle of the Pleistocene Ice Age, and it's a fairly warm climate there. I mean, today it might have been a little cooler back then by, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 degrees centigrade cooler. And I have a feeling it might have been a little less on the humidity. If you ever go to Indonesia, especially in Bali and some other areas, Surabaya, is that it's rather humid. My wife's from Bandung, and it's not quite as humid up there because it's up in the mountains. But they have also the volcanically rich soil there. And it takes this particular area of the world that back then, and having the volcanically rich soil and the precipitation and so on, in order to grow as many as 3 crops per year, like rice. And it was like their main staple. Plus they had other ones as well. And by the way, our word rice comes from actually the Dravida name, which is called Arisi. Arisi is the Dravida name for that. And we get from cereal is called from the Dravida name called Cerisi with an S. And that's what it takes to have the temperate climate, the precipitation, and the volcanically rich soil, so you can support a population of 20 million people. Plus, they also had a lot of natural resources, the tin and the zinc and the copper and all these kind of things, and gold. And so they're able to make weapons from that, and also to defend their civilization. And they also had colonies around the world because they also could circumnavigate the world. And by the way, when they had the destruction of Atlantis, they ended up having, because they knew how the equatorial currents went, they went basically into Peru and into Ecuador. That's why you've got a lot of civilizations down there, either discovered, undiscovered, or built over each other, or camouflaged with the jungle and so on. And so they had to go down to that area because what happened is it was still the ending of the Pleistocene Ice Age. It hadn't totally ended yet, so they had to go to this particular latitude around the equator, which, by the way, I got another interesting fact for you. You want me to elaborate on that a minute?
Yeah, please.
Okay, this one I think will really blow a lot of people's minds. But we found out that Atlantis is located also where it is. There's another piece of evidence, is that it's located on the equator. Now, the equator, it goes right through what is basically Sumatra today. But the real key is not the latitude, but it's a longitude, or the meridian. Now, this is what you'll find in your listeners very interesting. As you know, Greenwich Mean Time is located in not London, but Greenwich, England, at the Greenwich Observatory. That's where you have universal coordinate time, or Greenwich Mean Time. By the way, I'm a ham operator, so I'm used to dealing in this kind of time. And so that's where the day really begins as of today, because of I think mainly the convention, international convention they had, which actually was here in the United States in Washington D.C. And I believe it was I think the year was something like 1884 when they made this agreement. Although I think it started in 1882. We found out. But it's not always been at that location in the Greenwich Observatory, which is something like about, I don't know, it's like maybe 12 or something, or 15 kilometers would be east of London. But before that, it was actually in Paris, France. Paris, France was where they actually had the Greenwich, Greenwich Mean Time, Paris time, okay, the Paris Observatory there, because and a lot of people say, well, no, it's always been in England. No, you can look it up. It's not always been in the Greenwich Observatory. It was in Paris, but before that, it was actually in the Canary Islands, because they thought they thought Atlantis was the Canary Islands off the coast of Spain. But before that, it may have been someplace else, but the original place was in Atlantis, Indonesia, over Sumatra, which was all Java at the time. And what's very interesting is that it's where it ends up being at 0 degrees latitude and 0 degrees longitude, where X marks the spot. And in our book, there's also a cross of Atlantis that shows not only the concentric rings of Atlantis to the capital city, but also it's highly encoded to note that Atlantis was located at 0 degrees latitude, 0 degrees longitude, right over the equator, right over what is now Sumatra, and it more or less is, X marks the spot, where it's at, and it's where people can survive at the middle of the Pleistocene Ice Age. Is that interesting to you?
It really is. It absolutely is. And at the same time, I also think about our cycles, and will it be a short time before we go through either a super hot age and then another ice age? Like, because a friend explained it to me that, yes, that was an ice age 20,000 years ago, but that was even like a minier ice age, because there are far more drastic ones at that too. Anyhow, this other question, and I'm sorry to rush you on this, just more have piled up, so I may have to take some after. I just gotta make sure I get to them, so I don't, because I want to make sure everybody. And I want to say super thanks for the support. I have definitely from Nicholas Cashmore and Justin T. Again, you guys rock, and also Rolf Pfeiffer Mueller. And I want to thank you all for your support. Thanks for keeping this running. Okay, this one, the lead-in, first of all, you mentioned earlier to me alone before we came onto this show that you know a lot of people that have interviewed. In fact, you also mentioned Richard C. Hoagland. And so you know clearly about the ancient astronaut theory, right?
Yes, with Eric von Däniken.
Yes. Okay. So here's the question. This is from Manuel Silva. He says, Dr. J, tell your guest if he thinks the USOs, which are unidentified submerged objects, are related to the lost city of Atlantis.
Well, that's a really kind of a tough question. Here's the way that the best I can answer that. Professor Santos and myself, we're not so much big on the UFO part exactly. It wasn't into that as much. But I got to tell you, I've gone to many conferences where we're talking about ancient civilizations and so on, where there are UFO conferences most of the time, and as part of that.
Yes.
And actually got to know Dr. Lear quite well. He actually
Roger
me on
Roger Lear, the alien implant doctor.
Roger Lear.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, he interviewed me on Atlantis. I really liked that man. He was I really miss him. Okay, he passed away, as many people may know.
Yeah,
But
that's actually a lot. See, he was my mentor. I don't know if many people know this. He didn't live very far from me. He was one of my first guests 7 years ago. Because I went to law school, he wanted me to be his manager in his final years, which I did. I tried to get him as many gigs as possible, and I actually produced 2 documentaries on him, which if anybody wants to see, they are for free, available on my channel on YouTube. Just search for uh, Alien Human Project Part 1 and 2. But yes, great guy, and like you said, he did pass away, unfortunately, 5 years ago. No, 4 years
yeah,
ago.
and
5 years ago,
on the
2014.
UFO, and the UFO of anything. I mean, there's some people who think about maybe there might be this hollow Earth theory and submerging of these USOs underneath the ocean, UFOs going come from outer space and so on. You know, I really don't know, but I think there may be something to it more than what the government's telling us. What Professor Santos speculated was that the ancient Lemurians may have come from a planet similar to Mars, maybe Mars itself or something like that. And you only could kind of speculate that that may have been the case, that they may have ended up here and maybe made it with some of the native population here and so on, you know, with all this, DNA change and so on that may have taken place. So, you know, it's really tough to get, that tracked down. I can tell you that that there's another book that's out called I did a conference with this gentleman by the name of Stephen Oppenheimer. He has a book called Eden in the East, and it's similar in many ways to our book, Atlantis, the Lost Continent Finally Found. But what he's done is he's tracked the DNA out of Indonesia to like other parts of the world coming out of Indonesia, Atlantis, Indonesia, not like these Taiwan theories about coming from Taiwan and going to Indonesia and other parts of the world. So he's really did a lot of work on that. He's kind of a geneticist and a children's doctor, I forget. But he does this geneticist work, and he was tracking all that type of work, and for a number of years all over the Southeast Asia area. So he was speaking at some of these conferences I attended over in Indonesia and other places too. So I hope that answers the question. It's a really tough one to say if it has anything to do with Atlantis, but Professor Santos is speculating maybe several 100,000 years out that they may come from other Mars type.
Other planets, or even other, not just planets, but star systems directly, maybe even other galaxies at that, if especially they're using gravity, which would indicate that they have the ability to create Einstein-Rosen bridges.
Yeah.
That's a whole different topic, though. Now, there are several questions I do want to ask you if you need that break first, because I know these other topics, the other questions are great, fantastic ones from the people that have written them. So do you want to take another one, or are you ready?
I'll take a break now.
Let's set the break up. Everybody, don't go away. We'll be right back, and I promise you I will do my best to get to all your questions. And this is what I'm hoping all of you can do. Please copy and paste your questions that you have written in caps. Thank you for that. At the bottom again, so it makes it so much easier for me to make sure I catch them all. And all of you with the super chats, thank you all. God bless you, and you guys are the reason that this is able to keep running. And with that being said, Frank and I will take a quick break. We'll be right back in a little over 2 minutes. Hang tight. All right, welcome back to the second half so far of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, and we are speaking to the one and only Mr. Frank, or Doctor, should I say Doctor? Actually, Frank?
No, it's not Doctor. It's just Frank Joseph Hoff.
Okay, well, yeah, you said the name, Mr. Frank Joseph Hoff, and we are speaking on a very important topic, which I've always really wanted to cover, and I'm glad I found the man to talk about it with. And I do apologize. Let me just say that for everybody in the very beginning with some of the audio problems, and thankfully we got them fixed because this information is truly too important to not be talked about. Now, as I said, we have several questions for you, Frank, and let me see if I can get them because as the new ones come in, it brings me back to the bottom. But fortunately, I have two iPhones to work with, and not to mention computer. Okay, these might be out of order, but let me just start with here. This is from the most recent question, and like I said, I will try to get back to every single one. And if you guys can copy and repaste them back, make it so much easier. And yeah, here we go. So, Russell Grant, what was the great deplorable device that raised the oceans?
What's the great deplorable vice that raised the oceans?
Yeah, device or just what's your opinion on how the oceans were raised is basically, I'm assuming, what he's asking.
Okay, well, more like the mechanism.
Yes, I was thinking.
Yeah, what it is yeah, I mentioned it kind of earlier. I'm not sure if you caught all this, but what it is yeah, when the Krakatoa volcano went off, it initially caused the tsunami like you saw in Sendai, Japan, or in Banda Aceh, Indonesia, a number of years ago. I think it was actually December 26th, I think it was 2004. Professor Stanford was actually still alive at that time. And one in Sendai was, I don't know, a few years back. I remember the exact date. But what happens is that the tsunami goes in because of the Krakatoa volcano, because of all the seismic activity causing earthquakes and so on in the area. And so what it is that it's a harbor wave. That's what a tsunami is. It's different than a tidal wave, which is more controlled by the moon. So you have these harbor waves that are controlled more or less by seismic activity, or in many cases like earthquakes, okay, and maybe volcanoes. And so what happened is that the people at the time, the Atlanteans, were actually like burnt, and then they were drowned, okay, and so they had to try to escape that area. And by the way, just another connection to this, in many religions around the world, not all of them, but they have these baptisms.
Yes.
He found out that actually the original source of baptisms came out of Atlantis, because what happened is it ended up.
Wait, this is interesting because we're talking, baptism. I always assumed was created from, Jesus, but this is new to me. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, what happened is that it's a remembrance of our ancient ancestors when they were not only burnt because of the Krakatoa volcano, all the fly ash and maybe lava and things like that coming out, but also they were that went over their heads. And so when you do a baptism, you're usually having the water one way or the other go over your head. And so it's remembrance when we lost over 20 million people in a day and a night because of the catastrophic event of Atlantis. So it all goes back to that great drowning of that many people, which is basically the highest percent of people that ever flourished on our Earth, and also probably the highest quantity in like a day and a night. That's when they said like Atlantis it sunk in a day and a night. Well, it didn't sink as sea levels rose. And so that's the remembrance, and that's why I mentioned, like, read my statement earlier here too, of our ancient ancestors, and remembering them and recognizing them. And so sometimes you have these kind of holidays that are right around the called All Day, which is right around November or October 31st or something close to that date.
Interesting.
And so some religions have that, but it all goes back to the water going over people's heads, because as I mentioned earlier, I'm not want to get into all the religious part, but like John the Baptist, as many people may have heard, but he did his baptism. But where did he get it from? Where did this all come from before him?
Yeah, because I
so,
don't recall reading it or hearing from any priest of any Christian faith or even Jewish faith, that it was mentioned in the Old Testament. This is why I believe Jewish people don't do baptisms.
Yeah, well, it depends on what kind of Jewish population Messianic Judaism does. So that's another thing too. But aside from all that, later on, after the tsunami receded, and this is the rest of the question answer to it, is that later on the universal flood took place because the fly ash from the Krakatoa volcano went up in the atmosphere and stratosphere and came down on the glaciers to a mile high, or maybe even 2 miles high in some places, and ended up melting those glaciers off our continent. And a lot of weight took off. But it's the fly ash, because it's black or gray, absorbs the sunlight, and that's called the albedo effect. And again, in our book, and also on our website, there's a link, I think it's number 12012, that will show a link to a NASA webpage showing about this albedo effect and melting the glaciers off the continents, and that can happen. It's not just Professor Santos saying this or myself, and by the way, it's Dr. Santos too. So I hope that answers to the question.
Okay, just saying this to everybody, I'm going in reverse order, so I will go back to the newer questions after. So if they're different than we're on topic, Mr. Hoff, hopefully you could understand that, because I just want to make sure I get these people's questions in, because clearly they're very, very interested in what you're saying. Okay, is there merit to the myths of Atlantis trading and warring with Egypt, India, and Greece?
Okay, yeah, I mean, there was things going on. This is going to get to a really interesting part, so that's a great question. It's going to lead into another answer beyond the one he's asking here. The Atlantis was famous, okay, for having all these weapons because they had the strategic, metals and everything in Atlantis. That's why they wanted to protect that area, because they had those weapons that they could fight all sorts of battles and wars with. But they also had the giant elephants. The elephants they were famous for, they're bigger than, let's say, the African elephants or the Indian elephants today.
What about the elephants like woolly mammoths, if you consider that the same family, which I believe in some extent they were?
Yeah, they were known as like stegodons, or something like a woolly mammoth that size. Now, when I was over in Indonesia here a while back doing conferences and so on, they have the Bandung Museum, okay, and I had some pictures out this. I don't think anything's on the website, but there's pictures of a stegodon that I took when I was there, that they found not just one of these things or two of them, but they found a real complete one, but they found like several hundreds of these things around Indonesia, and sometimes in riverbeds and so on. And they assembled this one, and it looks like a mastodon or a woolly mammoth. It has a big tusk and everything like that. But this is what they were using in wars and battles that they were famous for in Atlantis. And as far as going to some of these other areas, yeah, I mean, they had trades going on. They had the trading route going on around the different parts of the world and different colonies and outposts. And that's why I'm saying some of these places people think that were Atlantis were just outposts or colonies. Real location of Atlantis is located in Atlantis, Indonesia, Indonesia and the surrounding area of Southeast Asia. That's it, and so the rest of them are these outposts and trading. So look they had, and here's another part to answer this too. A lot of people see in the Timaeus and Critias dialogues that Atlantis is located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is like in Morocco and Spain, I believe. And so you have these known as the Pillars of Hercules. But actually, really, they're not the original Pillars of Hercules. And besides, even if it's located outside, Plato never said how far outside they were located. He just said they were out of that area. But in fact, we found out that was not the original Pillars of Hercules. What is the original Pillars of Hercules, where all the ships came into port and so into the capital city of Atlantis, which by the name way is not only just the same name as the continent, but also another name for it is Poseidonus, who was the founder of Atlantis.
The god of water, the Greek god of water.
Yeah. And so also that location ends up being along the Lombok Strait, and the two pillars, original ones, is Mount Agun on the island of Bali. Everybody's heard of Bali. That's a great place to vacation to. And also Mount Rijani, which is on the island of Lombok. And it goes down the Wallace Line right into the city of Atlantis down that way. That's where all the ships came into port because it was deep enough to get the greatest ships. So they could go in and out, and then the concentric circles was of the city of Atlantis is located there. So they came all into port to dock their ships and go in and out of that area. It was passable and so on. And so that's where the original Pillars of Hercules are located. Now, what happened is the pillars get changed over time depending if something opens up. Let's say the Moluccas or the Sunda Strait with the Krakatoa volcano. Now, with the Toba one, what happened is that the Moluccas and some of that area got opened up by the Toba volcano going off, and also the Krakatoa was the other volcano, which is flanking the Moluccas at the time. And later on, it got transferred after Krakatoa went off. It ended up transferring over to Krakatoa and Mount Dempo. So as time went along, as different types of straits opened up, they changed where the Pillars of Hercules is, and the pillars like Atlas and also the Pillars of Hercules, the combination of Atlas and Hercules, and those are like your Greek names and so on that you'd probably be happy with.
But, it's ironic when we were saying, I think Greek word we were to which sounds very similar to Malacca is something you were saying. So each time I was hearing that, I was thinking something else, but obviously that's not what you were meaning. But I just wanted to throw that in. Here is a shorter question. So let me ask you. Here it comes. Does Atlantis play a part in the discovery of sailing?
Involved in the Satan?
And no. Discovery of sailing, like sailing on a boat.
Oh, discovered sailing. Well, they ended up knowing how to circumnavigate the whole world as far as that goes. They had all this, ships and actually maybe flying ships, went in the air called brahmanas and so on, that they could even take a whole environments, like parks and everything aboard these ships. But they have a total circumnavigation of the world. They know where they were going. They know where places were, all that kind of thing. They had and that's why they knew when at least some of them where to go to after the Krakatoa volcano went off and destroyed their homeland, totally. The other thing is too, along with that question, is they brought a lot of their inventions and sciences and maybe religion and so on that to other parts of the world. One thing is that they brought is this idea of pyramids, because what it is that they brought what was their holy mountain of paradise, which is the Krakatoa volcano, with them. That's why you have, let's say, step pyramids or pyramids in Egypt and pyramids, in Mexico and pyramids actually even in China, and pyramids and all sorts of places. Which brings up another answer to this question too, is that we actually found a pyramid mountain in Indonesia, in West Java, which is about something like 25 to 30 kilometers southwest of a city called Cianjur, and this is called Gunung Padang. It's a Gunung Padang pyramid in Indonesia, which we're dating the scientists about 10,000 years BP, 12,000, 15,000 when they're taking the samples, core samples, 20,000. Ended up going to at least 23,000 years old and maybe more, and that pyramid may end up being the oldest pyramid in the world. It's artificial, is not natural, and it's a pyramid that has caverns in it that are connected together in some cases. It has at least three. They're fairly good size. They're like 10 meters by 10 meters by maybe 6 meters high. And again, a couple of them are lit. The other thing really cool about them is that they found out they're air water tight, unlike places where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in Qumran, where we ended up having water leak into it or precipitation, and it ruined a lot of those Dead Sea Scrolls a lot. So we had to piece it back together over a period of, I don't know how many was it, a couple of decades or something.
And I don't think they're done either, right?
Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately missed seeing it when it came to Seattle here at the Pacific Science Center, but a number of years back. But if anything's found in there, like inside those things, then it probably would be well preserved.
Well, that's at least one good thing for having them airtight, obviously. You don't have to worry about not just water coming in, but even just the vapor of water, which would ruin, you could have rusty metal, for instance, or just water or parchment paper, whatever they were using at the time. I think it was papyrus in 180 BC was the New Testament written on. That's one thing I know the British Museum has copies of, which is like the seventh copy, because that almost disintegrated in literally 2 decades. So having it airtight, it would be safe.
That brings me to mind about that too. Why it's hard to get this information out of Atlantis and have the piece together this great mystery and puzzle, because through different wars and battles and things like that, a lot of sacred information gets destroyed. For instance, in the great library at Alexandria, they lost 750,000 scrolls.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Frank, is because I've always said that if we knew what the hell was in the Library of Alexandria, if we had everything there, we would be so more sophisticated. That literally set us back God knows how many centuries or even millennia.
Well, that's why, as I mentioned before, this was Professor Mauricio Nunes dos Santos' gift to the world, Dr. Santos' gift to the world, because we just lost a lot of information, and so when sometimes some people conquer, a civilization conquers another, they tend to destroy a lot of that previous civilization's work, and you can see that in Egypt and
even recently,
Mexico and other parts of the world.
Didn't something like that just happen in Afghanistan, where they demolished some, ancient structures for whatever reason?
I think it was probably in Afghanistan. Also, I think it might have been Iraq, and also when we had the situation that was going on in Egypt too, because in that Cairo museum, I was in that Cairo museum a few years earlier. I was along all those streets and everything there. But because I actually went inside the Great Pyramid, I was actually inside the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and so on, and there's really all this cool thing about the harmonic resonance in there and the whole thing. But yeah, I mean, you lose these kind of things, and I mean, I hope that maybe something like what they call the Hall of Records might be in a place like the Gunung Padang Pyramid Mountain. But what it's going to do, it's going to take people getting behind this project, and one of these things like maybe, I don't know, GoFundMe or whatever they call these websites to raise enough money to further excavate into that Gunung Padang Pyramid Mountain. I know all the key people that are involved in that. In fact, one of them I was looking to have on the show with you tonight, but I wasn't able to get a hold of him. And there's another one too, actually the main guy. And so it might be another show for you
Well,
altogether.
that and we still want to do the show
but
where we actually try to dissect some of the language too. Remember that? So
yeah,
yeah.
I mean that's with my colleagues over in Singapore. So
well, it's
if we
doable. You know, we got if
three
we
or
got
four way.
Skype or Zoom or something else, but yeah, you know, it'd be something that you would be the primary guest, and they, you know, I would definitely use you more as a co-host and that try to get information from them, obviously, and of course you'd have to
Yeah.
translate, you know, what they're saying to us, in not to say they don't speak English, but I'm saying that if they mention something that is very specific, something that needs to be more generalized for us, you know, that makes you an expert. That's what we would need.
Well, they speak English quite well, so there's not really a problem. One actually teaches English,
Mm-hmm.
and or the other gentleman, they actually one of them, the geologist, his name is Dr. Danny Hillman Natawijaya, and he studied in Auckland, New Zealand, besides Indonesia, and also here in the United States. I think it was the one of the universities down in California there.
Wow, so we're talking
well.
about possibly 3 countries on the same show, at the same time, 3 time zones even. New Zealand,
Well,
Singapore, and you know, our time, Pacific time. Oh, because you're in the
that's
Washington.
He
so.
studied to get his master's degree in Auckland and also PhD down in one of the UCLA, some type one of the universities down in California.
Mm-hmm. LA, yeah. USC, UCLA, one of those.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know which one it was exactly. Was it? And I forget exactly which university it was. But and then Dr. Or it's not Doctor, but Danny Irwanto also wrote a couple of books here in English as well as Bahasa Indonesia on Atlantis. One called Atlantis, the Lost City in Java Sea. And so I'd like to have him on maybe if we do another show too, because he's done a lot of investigation and he's spotted a lot more detail about the city of the capital city of Atlantis, which brings to mind something else that we're kind of working on. A colleague of mine is also brought up some ancient artifacts, and maybe these are weapons like your other caller is asking me about, and having maybe wars with other countries and so on. But they're very ancient and they're really peculiar in the way they were formed and how you say manufactured. And they're really weird. You don't see these type of weapons around, and also the statues and everything. But there's not just like 5 or 10 of them. There's not just like hundreds, but maybe even thousands. And there's no other place found in Indonesia except this one spot where we've got them. But we need to get them analyzed, and we're working on that and trying to get a dating on them, because they could just be a couple hundred years old. It might be a couple of thousand. It might be 10,000 years old. We just don't know. So I'm working on that one too. But that might be really something interesting, because it might be some really good evidence if it ever pans out.
Let me say this to all the people that are in the chat room. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, YouTube is not letting me go back to things. Maybe it's about 45 minutes, somewhere in that range. So unfortunately, if there's something that was a question that I believe we're not that far. But the point is if I don't see it, and if it hasn't been asked, please recopy it. Or try to rewrite it if you can't even see it yourself, and I will get to it. So now let me try to get to some of the more recent questions until I see anybody repost the older ones. Okay, the most recent question, Nicholas Cashmore, and by the way, thank you, Nicholas Cashmore, for your super chat, and everybody's for those tonight. Okay, was there harmonics in Atlantis like that of the Great Pyramid of Egypt?
Okay, that's a really hard one to answer, but I can tell you that if you're going to have some type of concert or something like that, the way that the pyramid was formed and everything, and the precision on that was Atlantean technology, okay, and the pyramid. It wasn't just the Egyptian. Now, there might be people like Dr. Zahia Was will argue with you on that, but that type of precision only could come from the Atlanteans that had that precision, and also to have the harmonics like you have an opera house. I mean, the really good harmonics. If you're going to play like a concert in there, it'd be absolutely fantastic. I can tell you that from being in there before, in the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber inside. It's just the way they're constructed so precisely, which also brings to mind Machu Picchu, Peru, which I've got to go to one of these days. That
you and
is
me
Atlantean.
both.
Yeah, that's Atlantean technology. The terracing that goes on there. The terracing is Atlantean technology. It's also an Angkor Wat, Angkor Thom, Atlantis itself. When they have these crops and everything, I saw it over there. And what it does is the terracing it controls the water and irrigation and everything, so it doesn't have erosion. And even up in Gunung Padang, you'll see retaining walls. If you go up there, there's some pictures that'll be on the internet. Maybe we'll put some on our website a time ago. But all this is Atlantean technology and controlling the water and the hydraulics and everything that has to do with Machu Picchu. And that's I mentioned, like, okay, when the destruction of Atlantis occurred, they ended up going down to Ecuador and Peru. That's why they have more ancient ruins, either known or unknown, in Ecuador and Peru than probably any place in the world. And they maybe even Göbekli Tepe also has some of this characteristics as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. That was one of the questions that actually disappeared from my view. It was about Göbekli Tepe.
But I think that really came afterwards. I mean, that's in Turkey.
Yes.
And I really feel that came, the Atlantis came first, Indonesia, that is, and it spread out from there. But they had to go, and when they fled out of there, and this is maybe an answer to somebody who's got a question coming up, is they had to flee out in a couple of different ways. They fled up into India and across over, let's say Asia, and then over to Europe, and they had to go out that way. Some of them did. At least after the Krakatoa volcano went off, and when the Toba went off, they flew into India. But a lot of them came back to Atlantis, but some of them still stayed in India. But on the rest, because Atlantis really got destroyed, they flew out going that north way and northwest, and through India and Asia and Europe. And then the other way they went is their seafaring civilization, so they circumnavigated right on over to Ecuador and Peru, because the Pleistocene Ice Age was still ending because of the albedo effect was going on, and also because everything had to kind of equalize out over time. And so eventually, because the ice came off the continents, like where I'm at here in North America, then the civilization could go northward after that, and maybe southward as well. But they had to be in a certain zone closer to the equator in order to survive, even though the Pleistocene Ice Age was ending, because it took maybe like 1,000 or so years for it to completely balance out and end.
Here's more about Göbekli Tepe. Why was Göbekli Tepe buried preemptively?
Why did it end?
Why was it buried preemptively is the question.
I don't know, because I haven't studied enough on that particular aspect, so I'm just going to say I really don't know what exactly happened. I mean, only one could maybe speculate on certain things that they maybe wanted to cover it up for some reason. But I know they're still digging out some of that, and I guess they're doing a pretty good job in doing the excavation. But it's going to take a lot of study, and to figure out, you got civilizations down in Ecuador and Peru, the same thing, and maybe even Mexico, I'm trying to think of the Aztecs,
and
the
Aztecs,
also the Mayas,
yes.
and so on, and some other civilizations there.
Which all have in common talking
a lot of those,
about wisdom from above.
A lot of those.
Are you still there, Frank?
Yeah, and by the way, those Quetzalcoatl. Yeah, the Quetzalcoatl and some of these, fallen angels and serpents, other serpents, and so a lot of those were the Atlanteans coming into the area, and so that's the Atlantis type of people that are these Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan and so on that are known in that area of the world, in Ecuador and Peru and so on. But these are Atlanteans coming in, and they're imparting their technology into into that world, because they were devastated and they needed to seek another life, and they also brought their holy mountain of paradise with them, the Krakatoa volcano in a sense, and that's why they started making pyramids and so on. They didn't make them all the same because they had different engineers and different sciences that had to come into the area, and they didn't always know exactly the same knowledge, but very similar. And so, but a lot of maybe scientists and engineers got wiped out during the Krakatoa volcano during this catastrophe, and you lost over 20 million people. So you lost a lot of let's say educated people.
Okay, this question here is very is a very specific one, and there are words in here that I'm definitely going to have a hard time pronouncing, but I will do my best. Rolf Pfeiffer Muller asks, I'm going to read it word for word. Please ask him if he knows the Khazar, aka Cash, Jewish pretending to be Brahmanis, corrupted the essence of Asivaham. Later, way later, these Khazar, aka Illuminated, hold the secrets of Masonry.
Okay. He's talking about the Illuminati is what he's talking about. It was a secret society.
Mm-hmm. Which, again, say they're illuminated ones, which are held the wisdom, which really, I say this fairly, I don't think as often as enough as I should, but the most valuable thing anyone can really offer you is information. And that's what it all comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, the Illuminati, a lot of this actually has to do with the occult, or occultism, which, by the way, Professor Santos, he ended up studying the occult, not because he wanted to be an occultist or anything like that, because it has to do with hidden meaning behind things. And so he had to take science and other, aspects and disciplines in order to decipher the whole notion or riddle of Atlantis. And it's just the occultism or cult means that it has hidden meaning, and so a lot of these secret societies and groups also played into a lot of that and try to keep this knowledge about Atlantis secret from the profane. And so the Atlanteans themselves, and Professor Santos was the representative of the Atlanteans themselves, the people that perished from the earth, and I'm now their representative in a sense because of him passing away. So I'm kind of more like the opposite side of the Illuminati, or the anti. I want to get information out to the public. I don't want to hide it like they do. Okay, I think we're getting up to an advanced enough understanding of this, and I'm trying to straighten out the misinformation and other information as well. Which, by the way, brings up to mind that Hitler was looking for a certain power of Atlantis as well. That's what he was seeking, the Ark of the Covenant and all these kind of things, and where Atlantis was. Some people even think that now that Hitler, instead of trying to escape out of Germany to South America, may have escaped out to Indonesia. And
that's interesting. I've absolutely heard that he escaped to Argentina, possibly Brazil, and which a lot of Nazis did go to Brazil. And then, of course, there are other people, like if you talk about Admiral Byrd and Project High Jump, that they did go to Antarctica for that. There are, that we do know the FBI did track them, at least had an open file through the 50s, if not even 60s, apparently, from being, again, another thing in South America, the Alps. They say Hitler in the Alps. But I've never quite heard about Hitler in Indonesia.
Yeah, there's a thought about that. So I haven't checked it out as much myself on that, but I know a lot of them did go down to Argentina and some of those places when they had to flee out of Germany after World War II. Well, but here's the rest of something very interesting also I wanted to tack on to this. it wasn't just that the Krakatoa volcano went off that caused the destruction of Atlantis proper, the advanced civilization. There was a fight that was going on, a war between the Dravidas and the Aerial Semites at the time, and it's called the War of Atlantis. And so it's the sons of light and the sons of darkness. Okay, and so what happened is one side was trying to get one up on the other side during this war. So they had this, what they thought was a bright idea, which ended up wasn't such a bright idea. And by the way, Professor Santos knows well about this because of his background. Somebody got this idea that they should take some type of a nuclear bomb and put it down or near the Krakatoa volcano. The only thing is that it went off a lot more than they thought it would with the chain reaction. And Professor Santos checked highly into this because he was a nuclear physicist and a nuclear engineer. That was his primary, disciplines that he was into and teaching, by the way, at the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Belo Horizonte, Brazil. And so it went off a whole lot more, and that caused the destruction of almost the entire world at the time because of this particular super volcano going off, linked together with a nuclear explosion. And it was a lot more powerful than the one that went off in, let's say, Hiroshima or Nagasaki, something like 1 million times. So it literally destroyed almost the whole world, something like 70% of the mammals on Earth and species, and the saber-toothed tiger, or the woolly mammoth, and all these kind of animals came to destruction, and so on. And so it wasn't that the first nuclear weapon went off in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was at the time of Atlantis destruction it went off, and that's why it may seem somewhat more simpler today. It was very complex to put together a nuclear weapon with Robert Oppenheimer. He had other people doing it.
The father of the first nuclear weapon. That's right. Not Edward Teller, the father of the H-bomb, but the guy that was there for the test in 45, right before we launched Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Other forbidden topics from YouTube, but anyway, that's a whole different story about censorship. Anyway, go on.
Well, he was saying to some college students, I think at the time, or university students, that it wasn't the only time that this bomb had been used in some type of war. And so it's not only that, but in Mohenjo-Daro, in the Indus Delta Valley area, which is now Pakistan, and Harappa, they've picked up nuclear signatures, half-life daughter products in that area have been detected that are a signature to a nuclear bomb going off. Now, that's not something like, okay, Professor Santos and I went over and we went and exploded some type of nuclear bomb or something. And even if we did, okay, just to make our point, it wouldn't have the signature going back to around that time. So, I mean, this is kind of a dating. It's not something you fake or, you try to do this to gain a point. The point is that this has a nuclear signature dating back to that time and those areas when they had using tactical nuclear weapons as well. And also, I believe in Iraq was another place they found the signatures as well, and the sand and everything that was crystallized because it took heat like a nuclear weapon.
You're talking about in the past, obviously, right? Just like the Bhagavad Gita mentions that, right?
Yeah, I mean, some of these kind of things, and also some of these explosions, or these mandalas or mandalas. Mm-hmm. Have you seen those from India?
No, I just know also, about the Vimanas.
Well, okay, that's the ships, but these type of artwork.
Oh, it's artwork.
Display the explosion. Yeah, they some of them show the explosion of a nuclear bomb on those.
The one that had the
mandalas.
10,000 suns, etc. Right? That the way it was described. You're talking about? They actually show this in art. They visualize this for us to see.
Yeah, but there's many times they'll make this mandala all sorts of things, but a lot of them are even made of a nuclear bomb going off, and so it shows that. But this, I mean, this kind of thing
Robert
also took place.
Oppenheimer actually he recited the nuclear bomb description of the Bhagavad Gita right after the first test in May of '45, right?
Well, yeah, because this is the whole thing. This is where they got advanced knowledge
Mm-hmm.
of how to make a nuclear bomb, which is the same thing that Adolf Hitler was after. The only thing is we got there first.
We got their
Otherwise,
and then after that we got their engineers through Project Paperclip. Otherwise, it's sad fear that if the war went on a couple years longer and we did not have those weapons, it's very possible that we'd be living in a very different world.
And the Professor Stancil's also pulled all the names of the people that were working on that project too, that were involved in that and had the Atlantean technology. I don't have it right here with me at the moment, but I did run across them. And Oppenheimer, of course, was one of them, and there's several other ones from maybe different countries. But yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting thing, especially with the situation maybe around the world with, trying to contain nuclear weapons.
Here is a very specific question, and I'm going to see if there are any more, but if there are more, I just want to see if you're able to stay a few minutes longer just to make sure we're caught up.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Again, I don't see one after this, but I will look. This is, again, from Rolf Pfeiffer Muller, and it's another one of those that has words that I'm going to have a hard time, so let me try to read it word for word. Please ask if he is acquainted with the Kumari Kamdan and Asivaham in the Thiravulalam, Exegesis and Numismatic. I don't know. I should really just copy this and see if I could text it to you in some sort of way. That will probably be the best way to get this to you if I can. Let's try. In that time, if I can't, then I do apologize. But let's see what I can do to make sure that you have this in front of you. So let me give it a shot. If not, I will scour for more. If not, I will see what other information you missed, and then we will end this.
You have to text it to my cell number.
That's what I'm doing right now. And it's the one you'll see. It's in caps, and it's from Rolf Pfeiffer Muller. It's right in the center of where the chats are. And it is off to you. Then let me know if you got it, and if you could read if you get it. And I will just start scouring to make sure there's nothing I missed. That I can still see, by the way, for any of those that were later questions, which unfortunately they do put a limit, which totally sucks. I didn't even know it was that. Anyhow, it is what it is. We gotta, I guess, work with their system. Okay. I'm not seeing anything else. Oh, I do see one. And if anyone has any final ones, be sure to drop them in the chat before I have to end this. Mr. Hoff, any luck?
I don't think I got your text coming through my cell phone, so I'm looking for it now.
You don't. Okay. You know what? Then we'll just bypass that. And yeah, go ahead.
I know it right now. It's Indian terms that relate to Atlantis, is what I do know right off from my remember on it, but I can't tell you precisely on it. It's something I have to look up a little bit more detail. But it is out of India, names for having to do with Atlantis. I can pretty much tell you that.
Yeah, they did definitely sound like some, they do sound like that's where they would originate from, at least a form of it in some sort of way. Okay, here is, was Krakatoa triggered by man, or maybe by something other than man even? I'm talking about something living and breathing is what I'm assuming it's alluding to.
Well, I kind of answered that in a way before, as these things, I mean, that's a really tough question in some ways, because, it was a volcano that was volcanically active, and so was Toba. And Toba already gone off 75,000 years ago, which is like something like the biggest explosion on the face of the Earth, at least naturally. And the area of Indonesia is the most volcanically active area of the Ring of Fire in the entire world. And they're going off all the time, even last week or two. And been going off. Some were going off where my wife lives in the area of Bandung, Indonesia, and West Java, which is called Java Barat in Indonesia, by the way. But yeah, I mean, the only thing is that they took maybe like a volcanically active mountain, Krakatoa, or Krakatau, and they, some guy got this, what they thought was a brilliant idea at the time, and then put the nuclear bomb down there, and it went off a lot more than they expected. Chain reaction. They thought it was going to go off just a little bit more, and not just and it went off and almost destroyed the entire world, including probably the people that put it down there to begin with. So that's as much as we know, but it because of that, it may have caused a volcanically active mountain go off. It's like we had when Mount St. Helens here in Washington State, and it was erupting and a little bit, or having some rummaging and showing seismic activity quite a while before it actually went off, which was on May 18th, 1980, I believe was the date. So, you know, I think that really that probably the nuclear bomb going down there set off a volcano was probably ready to go off anyhow. It's just a matter, it might have been 2 years later, 10 years later, whatever it might be, but it probably triggered it. That's what happens, is sometimes things trigger each other, which causes also a positive feedback effect and makes it go even more, you know. By the way, Professor Santos is also involved in he's a climatologist, and he wrote some original papers to the scientific community on this greenhouse effect or climate change a long time ago about it, and so he was involved in that, and he was also involved in the alcohol fuels program, an ethanol fuel program down in Brazil, where something like 95% of the vehicles now use this ethanol in their cars, and pure ethanol, not just mixed with gasoline, and then it's called alcohol that they have down there. So he was involved in that, and so they only import. In fact, they don't even import any oil at all. They actually have a source outside the coast of Brazil, so they're totally energy independent down there.
Yeah, they use ethanol, right, too, in Brazil.
Yeah, it's called alcohol. That's what it's called, alcohol.
Interesting.
And so I hope I answered your question in the sense that it probably was triggered by that, you know, nuclear explosion, but it probably would have went off sooner or later, just like Toba did.
Well, Mr. Hoff, we are officially caught up with all the questions that I could see. Is there any final points you think that you should mention?
I guess I can say is that the international date line is also located over towards that area. So that's another reason too that that's where really the date started and ended. The other thing cool is on our back of our book. That's actually it's not the one that's on Amazon, but they changed the cover a bit. But on the back of our book, it shows a rising sun. So what happened is, at the time of Indonesia, the sun ended up, it was the start of the day, like Japan has, it's called the land of the rising sun. You see that sun on the white background of their flag. Well, it really wasn't Japan that was the land of the rising sun. It was really Atlantis, because it was where the day began when the sun came out of the ocean, and that's what it shows on our one of our books, the original book that we had printed in Brazil, not the one that's on Amazon right now. But also is a land of the setting sun, because it was set behind the mountains. So it was the land of the rising sun, the land of the setting sun, and also Bali, the famous Bali where a lot of people go to tourists. That was also known as the navel of the world, the navel, like belly button of the world.
Now, with that being said, let's plug in your website where people can find you and purchase your books.
Okay, our website is atlan.org, in other words, www.atlan.org. It's a first 5 letters. This is the .org website. Our book, written by Professor Richat Santos, is Atlantis, the Lost Continent Finally Found, and it's the subtitle of that is The Definitive Localization of Plato's Lost Civilization. It's on Amazon and many other books you can obtain it from.
With that being said, Frank, I absolutely want to thank you. This has been a super informative show. As you could also tell that there was a lot of interest from all the people asking all the questions. And we definitely would plan in the future what we were talking about the other show, if not two, that we have to do. And of course, there's always more information I know that I can learn from Atlantis. With that being said, I want to thank everybody who was listening. I really want to thank all the people for the super chats. Especially, I wanted to give my super thanks to the Blue Crew and specifically the people that I'm just going to read these in no particular order, but Two Headed Tasmanian, Rockstar, Justin, Nicholas Cashmore, Roll Fife from Moeller, and of course, Paper Crane Wishes. I believe that is all, and I want to thank you all. Now, remember, I have a hard time keeping up with emails if that's what you're trying to contact me with. If you are trying to get a hold of me, if you tag me in Twitter, that is the one thing that is under my control. Or find a way to get my phone number through somebody. That's what I can tell you. Guest requests. I do take them, and everybody you have asked for, I promise you, is in the works. I don't like announcing guests far in advance for many reasons. They sometimes cancel. Sometimes you never know what happens. So, for instance, when David Paulides or Lou Elzinato or Graham Hancock were all scheduled. Something happened from the time to then. That's why I never promoted them. But I promise you, I'm working on everybody. Do tag the names in Twitter that you want me to search for. And remember, I can always use more help, especially in social media, tech support, pretty much whatever you guys can help with. Now, the archives, they are being worked on daily. I did get informed that all the 2013 shows, which are not on YouTube, have been uploaded. I'm trying to figure that out, and I definitely can use some more tech support in that area if any of you know that. Remember, folks, the Joe Rogan Experience. I put the link in there. Use the suggestion box to make sure you suggest me going. With that being said, folks, I'm going to tell Frank to please hold on a quick moment. Thank you all. Unless I do something this weekend, I plan on being here on Monday. Love you all. Be safe. Wherever you are in the world, please always keep your mind open, your eyes in the sky, and most importantly, remember that all of you are going to be part of making disclosure happen if that's what you seek. That being said, I guess I'm signing off with some outro music tonight.
And thank you, Dr. J, and all your listeners.